Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peter Watches TV, where I cover all the TV shows, and then I come over here and I talk about them. So if you like to watch TV shows and you like to talk about TV shows, come over here and hang out with me. Today I want to do a reaction to a new true crime documentary series that just came out on Hulu a couple weeks ago. But before I get into that, I do want to say that recently a lot of people have reached out to me about my coverage of true crime documentary series and told me that they're really enjoying my coverage of it, and they have a lot of suggestions for shows that I should watch. And I just want to say I really appreciate it. I have kind of done coverage of every kind of TV show over here. I've done a lot of true crime. I've done a lot of reality TV. I've covered Sister Wives. I've covered 1,000-Pound Sisters. I will continue to do that in the future. But I absolutely love to watch true crime documentary series. I keep a running list on my phone of every documentary series that I've ever watched. For 5 years, one of my very good friends and I hosted a true crime book club. So I've read, I don't know at this point, 60 to 70 true crime novels, probably more than that because I was reading true crime before that and still am reading it today. And I have a vast history of interest in true crime. So I love covering true crime over here. I don't always get it right. My opinion may differ from yours, but I love having conversations about true crime stories that are either closed or still ongoing. My interest is more in unsolved mysteries, more in open cases that have not been solved yet, but I do like talking about closed cases as well. And so with that being said, I just want to put it on record and say that I am committed to covering almost every new true crime documentary that comes out. So if you see that I haven't talked about a documentary or that I haven't mentioned it, please feel free to message me, email me. I have an Instagram that is associated just with this channel that is called Peter Watches TV. Feel free to direct message me over there and say, I would love for you to do coverage of this, or I would love for you to do coverage of that. One of the problems is that I get a lot of suggestions from documentaries that came out 4 or 5 years ago. And I watched that documentary when it came out 4 or 5 years ago. The problem is I would love to do a reaction to it, but I don't remember a lot sometimes about it. You know, like one of my favorite documentary series that I was kind of late to the game on was The Jenks. And I watched The Jenks and then I watched part 2 when it came out. But I probably watched the original Jenks documentary probably 3 years after it originally came out. So for me to do a reaction to it today, I could do a reaction to it. I could do a reaction to Making a Murder, The Keepers, The Staircase. I mean, there's so many documentaries that I've seen. Goodnight Sugar Babe, that's available on YouTube. It's one of my favorite true crime documentaries. I could do a reaction to any true crime documentary, and if you would like me to do that, I can do it. I'm just going to forget a lot of facts. And so it's one of the reasons why if I watch a true crime documentary series, I want to get on camera like the next day or two, and I want to do a reaction to it. Because if I don't, then I will forget some things. So I just want to preface this by saying that, and that I will get some things wrong, and my opinion won't always be right, and my opinion changes constantly when I see new information come out about true crime cases. So I just want to say that. The other thing I want to say is that this channel is just a reaction to the documentary series. It is not delving in deeply into the case. From time to time, I might speculate about what I saw in the documentary or what I thought about the documentary, but it's not a deep dive into the case. And often, you guys really educate me on the case, because a lot of you will say in the comment section, you know, I have followed this case since it happened. I live in the same town. I have followed this case for the last 10 years. And so that's vital to me because you guys give me a lot of information that I didn't know. A lot of these documentaries, I watch them and then I kind of move on. And a lot of these documentaries I watch and I get very interested in the cases. So I just wanted to say all that before getting into this reaction today. But I am very committed to watching any new true crime documentary that comes out and doing a reaction to it. If you're wanting to keep up with it, I'm currently watching every new train wreck documentary that comes out on Netflix. I think a new one just came out this week, P.I. Moms. So I will be watching that and reacting to it. And my most recent one was the Balloon Boy train wreck documentary. So today I want to talk about her last broadcast, which just came out on Hulu. Does it have a date on here? No, it doesn't. But it came out on Hulu, I think, a couple weeks ago. Her last broadcast, The Abduction of Jodi Huisentruit. And it came out, in 2025. It came out, I think, 2 weeks ago because it was right after the anniversary of Jodi Huisentruit. It was the 30-year anniversary of Jodi Huisentruit's abduction, which happened, I believe, June 27th of 1995. So the synopsis for the show says, a TV show anchor vanishes in 1995 under mysterious circumstances, but the biggest leads in decades could mean finally solving the chilling cold case. So it's about this newscaster. I believe she was actually 27 at the time that she was abducted, and her name was Jodi Huisentruit, and it took place in Mason City. Was it Mason City, Iowa? Mason City, Minnesota? I think it was Mason City, Iowa. I actually have the Wikipedia pulled up here too, so let me read this to you really quick. Jodi Sue Huisentruit, born June 5th, 1968, went missing June 27th, 1995, was an American news anchor for KIMT in Mason City, Iowa. She disappeared in the early morning of June 27th, 1995, soon after telling a colleague that she had overslept and was running late for work. As there were signs of a struggle outside her apartment, Huisentruit is believed to have been abducted. However, extensive investigations failed to uncover any clues to her disappearance, and Huisentruit was declared legally dead in 2001. So I took some notes on this, and I will get into some of the notes here in just a second. I have to tell you, I will just tell you my immediate reaction in case you want to watch this documentary. And I'm going to get into a lot of the details of the documentary, but I'm not going to get into everything about it. This was not my favorite true crime documentary that I've seen. I wouldn't even put this in my top 10 for 2025. And in all honesty, it was the way that it was produced and the way that I felt like it was sensationalized, I thought kind of dulled down the story of Jodi Huisentruit. So the documentary is it's in 3 parts. The first part is really kind of the background story and her family and friends and her going missing. And the second and third part is more that's come out about her abduction and looking into the 4 suspects and things like that. The reason that I say that it's sensationalized is because there's a lot of storylines they go into that have no leads whatsoever. I thought they did a fantastic job of describing who Jodi Huisentruit was. They have her sister interviewed heavily in the documentary. And this is always a big point of contention for me when I'm reading a true crime novel, or if I'm watching a true crime documentary series or just a standalone, is how the treatment of the victim is portrayed. Do they focus a lot on the humanizing of the victim or the victim's families? I will say that they did do that. I thought that they did it beautifully. I thought that they really explained who Jodi Huisentruit was as a human being. They even talked about what she could have become had she, not been abducted and things like that. For me, where it was missed was in the way that the investigation was done, and kind of how the documentary seemed a little misleading to me. So, and I will get into that in just a second, but I thought the portrayal of who Jodi Huisentruit was as a human being, I thought was beautifully done. The thing is, I went into this case not knowing anything about this case. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard one thing about this case, which is always interesting. And people will say, how do you read and watch so much true crime, but you don't know anything about this case? Well, I probably know 20 cases that most people don't, and they probably know 20 cases that I've never heard of. And I just had never heard of this case. I mean, maybe in reference to something else, but I didn't know anything about this case. In talking to a couple of my friends since I watched the documentary, one of my friends who has followed this case for a very long time, she said, is there any new information? I said, there's absolutely no new information whatsoever. I honestly, I was a little confused as, was this a tribute to Jodi Huisentruit? What were they trying to, get the story more active so more people would talk about? What was interesting was, through the majority of the documentary, there's a journalist that is interviewed. I can't remember what her name is. Hold on a second. Well, she's actually the executive producer on the documentary, which I thought was interesting that she's the executive producer, and she was also one of the main interviewees on the documentary. And her name is Maria Oz. And so she was heavily interviewed throughout the documentary. And the reason why she was heavily interviewed was because in 2022, the TV show 2020 did a special on Jodi Huisentruit and her abduction. And Maria was the one that put this entire special together on 2020 that got a lot of attention. And it kind of woke up the story of Jodi Huisentruit and what had happened. And then there were some other people, some eyewitnesses that came out and started talking about it. There was a friend of Jodi's that came out and talked about her ex-husband possibly could have been a suspect. What I didn't understand in watching this documentary, because this documentary is getting really, really heavily hyped, is that there was not a lot of information to go. And like I said, my opinion is not always popular and it's not always right. This is just my opinion from watching it. I didn't get done with the documentary where I felt like, oh my God, like this is like, they're gonna, like when I watched the Amy Bradley one, I felt like there was a lot of stuff that could still be looked into that had just come out in the last couple years. I didn't get that with this case whatsoever. In fact, what I got from this case was they really had not done a lot of investigation. The police department in Mason City, Iowa, really had not done a lot of investigation into this case until the 2020 special. And then when the 2020 special came out in 2022, they started looking at this case more because people were calling them and giving them some information. I feel like this investigation, the missing of the abduction of Jodi Huisentruit, I feel like has not been given a lot of attention. And I felt like it was shown in this documentary. They have a police detective. They don't really ever say if he was like working in the case at the time. Like you would have to know that if you followed the case. But he seems young enough that I don't think he probably was. I mean, they reference like who the lead detective was at the time. So I don't think he had anything to do with, I think he actually at one point says when I picked up and came in, I started looking into this case. But what's interesting about it is that he like goes down all these alleys and it's like, yeah, we never looked into this before. I'm like, this is an open case for 30 years. You've never looked into it before. And you say that people are talking about this. I'll be honest with you. I feel like they failed Jodi Huisentruit to some degree. I mean, the family and the friends were so cooperative with the police and the interview and stuff like that. But I'll be honest, if I would have been a little pissed because I would have been like, I feel like you kind of like failed her a little bit. Like, I don't know. It was interesting to me watching it and all that and kind of seeing how this goes. So let me give you like some of my notes and what I thought about it. So episode 1, and I put in here at the very top, I put, if anything, the documentary made me think how little they followed up in this case until the 2020 special came out in 2022. Now they're following up with it because they're doing this for a documentary. Like, is this for the documentary or is it because Maria, the executive, because I think it's interesting that the 2020 special that got so much attention, the woman that put that together and produced the 2020 special, all of a sudden decides, I'm going to make a documentary out of it that's 3 parts and sell it to Hulu. But there's not really any new information from the 2020 special to the documentary. I don't know why that needed to be done. I don't understand why, except for just to bring more attention to the Jodi Huisentruit story. But if you're going to do that, then I think a better way to maybe have done that would have been to make the whole thing about the efforts that the family had gone to and showed a lot more of like, I mean, there really didn't seem like there was much investigation that had been done in the last 30 years. I mean, initially there was, but anyway, I don't know. I just didn't get it. I didn't understand it. And then I looked it up because I was like, is this journalist that they keep on interviewing, this Maria Oz, is she like involved in this documentary? And you know, like, I love every true crime documentary. I didn't think this was horrible. I stepped away from it kind of like, you know, like, I feel bad that this happened to her and her family. But like, I don't know. And it was interesting to me because I had all these theories going through my head that they didn't even mention in the documentary whatsoever. So when I looked it up and I saw that this journalist that's being interviewed, that was a 2020 journalist, is now the executive producer putting together this documentary, I was like, so what was was the 2020 one not good? Like, it got a lot of attention. They talk a lot about it in the documentary. So anyway, the first episode, they talked about her going missing. And so what happened was she woke up late for work and her coworker called her because she worked the morning, like noon. She was morning and noon. So she was like a newscaster. And so she was the morning and the news, or morning and noon news. And so she would have to, her coworker came in, I think she said about 2 a.m. And Jodi would come in between like, I think like 3 and 4. And then she would start like putting the stories together that this woman had already started developing. This woman would come in, it was her coworker and her friend. She would call the police departments, find out all these stories. Jodi would come in, and they said that she would often, like, you know, have her hair wet. She would, like, bring her blow dryer, her makeup and stuff, and do all that at the station before the morning news. Well, she hadn't shown up yet, so her friend called her. And she woke up, and she said, oh, my God, I'm running late. I overslept. Let me jump in the shower, and then I'll be there. Well, she never showed up to work. So they ended up doing a welfare check. And when they did a welfare check, because they had to go on the news and everything, when they did the welfare check, the police found her car was still there, and they found a bent key, and they also found like the hair dryer, her makeup bag, I believe. They found a bunch of other stuff of hers. So it looked like somebody had come from behind and attacked her and then abducted her, and then all of her stuff was spilled all over the ground. So that was how she went missing, and that's where they turned it into like she's not just missing, it's an abduction, because something is very wrong here. The main people that they interview in the documentary are the chief detective, who seemed like a really, really nice guy. It almost kind of seemed like he was picking up the pieces for what had been done incorrectly in the past. Her sister, her friends, her coworker, and this journalist from 2020. They're the main people that are interviewed throughout this. They go and they talk about her family history and her growing up, and that she always wanted to be like famous and be a newscaster. And then they start talking about this guy named John Vanise, who was the last guy to see her. He was an older gentleman that she was like friends with. You never really got an idea if she ever dated this guy or what. He named his boat after her. And it was interesting because they kind of played it up like he was like this wealthier older guy, but he lived in a duplex. And so like, maybe it's just me, but I don't think of like grand wealth as somebody living in half of a duplex, but that's just me. I love a duplex, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think of grand wealth as like, and they acted like he was like this rich guy, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know, but in that he was like so much older than her. And so it comes out later that he said the night before, so she had gone to a golf outing. And so the night before, he said that she stopped by his house, and then they watched this video because he had just hosted a birthday party for her. They watched a video of the birthday party. She had been drinking, and then she went home. Well, they did a timeline, and they found out that that couldn't be true because by the time that she left the golf course and got home, I can't remember who she called, a friend, I think. She called a friend on the phone, and it was like 28 minutes later. There was no way she could have done that and stopped by his house and watched the video, which was 20 minutes long. So his story is not true. It's like there's lies in the story. And then they talk about the 2020 special on 2022, which was called Gone at Dawn. And then towards the end of it, they are talking about different suspects of what could have happened. And they reveal that one of Jodi's best friends, her name is Patty. She says her ex-husband, because of the 2020 special, they had seen this guy standing outside of the apartments where Jodi lived. And so she's like, oh, I think it's my husband. This is Brad Miller burnt. And that he had called her on the 10-year anniversary of Jodi's abduction and was like, isn't it so sad? And she hadn't heard from him in 10 years. And that he had driven this white Econoline work van, which I swear to God, every time I watch a true crime documentary, they're always abducted in a white Econoline van. I mean, it's like from California to Iowa, it's always a white Econoline van. So you might want to not ever buy a white Econoline van. Anyway, and so she was like, I swear he went to go visit her, I swear. But she didn't really have any evidence. She didn't have any evidence at all that he went to go visit her. She just was like, I know 100%. They're like, do you really think that he went to go visit her? And she's like, 100%, 99%. But she had no evidence. She didn't know anything. Do I think she really cared? Yeah, I think she really cared. I think she was really worried about her friend. I think she was putting pieces together the way that we all do. But it doesn't mean that it was true. Then they do these composite drawings of this odd man that was standing outside of Jodi's apartment 2 days before, and her best friend's like, 100%, that's him. 100%, that's him. But as of 6/25, there was no charges filed against him. I actually didn't think they were going to bring him anymore because this is all in the first episode, that they were going to bring him up anymore in the documentary, but they did towards the end. And he was extremely cooperative with law enforcement. So this is what I'm talking about. Okay, towards the end, they want him to bring him in. They drive to him to go interview him. Fine, no problem. He actually says, I will drive to the police station so you can interview me in the police station. They interview him in the police station. The police detective, he doesn't ever come out and say he's lying, but he's like, well, he won't answer this. And he keeps on coming in and out of the interview room. It's like all for production value. I don't know. I just thought it was tacky in the context of this abduction investigation. I just didn't think it was good journalism. And so he keeps on coming out and he's like, yeah, he like chugged this entire bottle of water in one setting. You go and show up to the man's door. You ask him to interview him out of the blue. He willingly goes to the police station, willingly sits down for an interview, willingly gives a polygraph test, which you won't give the results on. They can't give the results on, but they say they're looking into it further. This man was more cooperative than any suspect I've ever seen in any true crime documentary, especially as somebody that they're trying to paint as a murderer of a woman that disappeared 30 years ago. You know, I thought he cooperated highly. And then at the end, when he's just like, no, I'm not going to do it anymore, they're like, anyway. So, episode 2, Patty's ex, this, what was his name, Brad Millerbent, he becomes like the main suspect. And she's convinced the sketch is him. She talks about him having drinking and anger problems. They show this whole thing. This is where, to me, it was like, I don't know. Where was the focus on the abduction and Jodi and the investigation? They show this whole thing about them getting married at Mall of America, and that it was like this Valentine's Day thing or something. I don't know. And that he met Jodi there, and it was all these couples that got, I don't care. I don't care. I didn't care about this whole storyline. And no offense, Patty. I think you seem like a very nice person, but I don't care about you. I don't think your husband did anything. I don't know. To cooperate that much with police, like, it just, when he doesn't have to at all. They talk about seeing the white Econoline van. Then they talk about how the fact that he had dinner with her, with Jodi, in October, the year before, and that then he tried to see her on June 5th, which was right around the time of her divorce. So it later comes out that, like, they were divorced on, like, the 23rd. He tried to get a hold of Jodi on the 5th, which was actually a month before she was missing. I mean, he would have had to have been hanging out in this town for, like, a month. And he did have work that would put him in this town. So, I don't know. I almost kind of feel like the dinner in October, because, I mean, Jodi's not here to say what it was about, and they don't really say whatever came out of the interview. It could have been him saying, can you talk to Patty because I don't want to get this divorce. I mean, we don't know what that conversation was, but they make it like he was trying to, like, get with Jodi. I don't know. It was, the whole thing to me was very inconclusive. And I could be completely wrong, and he could be a murderer too, you know? I don't know. Then they supposedly see him outside, and then she goes missing. Okay. But then they skip, and now we're back on John Van Cise, the older guy. Okay, we're done with Brad for a while. We're back to John Van Cise, and he's talking about how they watched this tape of this birthday party after the golf outing, and that they talked, but then they said that she talked to a friend on the phone 20 minutes later, so none of the timing doesn't make sense. The friend tells the reporter that Jodi was gone before, I don't know what that means, but anyway, and that she was gone from his house, and that he says that she was drunk and left his house at 11 p.m. Well, the only way that that would make sense is if she went home, then came back to his house, then left at 11 p.m. and she was drunk. John died in 2024, so they were trying to get a search warrant for, like, his property and whatever, but it's sealed. Whatever came out of it is sealed. But there is nothing that came out of it, because if there was, then they would have released it for this true crime documentary to say John Van Cise did it. But John Van Cise died in 2024. Needless to say, John Van Cise was extremely cooperative for years, and the detective even says he was so cooperative with us for years, and then just one day it stopped. Probably because of 10 years of being questioned, and he'd given you guys everything, and maybe he was a little weird, and maybe he was a little different, and maybe he had a crush on a woman that was younger than him and whatever. And maybe he threw a birthday party and named his boat. But that doesn't mean that he's a killer. And they even say it on the documentary. They go, but that doesn't make him a killer. It doesn't make, I think the sister says that. She's like, yeah, I think he was a weird guy, but it doesn't make him a killer. There's no evidence whatsoever to point to John Van Cise in this. But he died in 2024, so we'll never know. So then they spend a lot of time on this guy named Tony Jackson, okay, who apparently lived in the area and is a serial, can't say the word on YouTube, but of women, okay? And he lived in Mason City at the time that she went missing. And then he has this fellow inmate that says that Tony confessed to him about the abduction of a newscaster. And that he does this rap. And the rap is like where her body is. So they go out to this place where the rap song tells them that the body is. And there's nothing there whatsoever. Okay? He says on there that he didn't know her except for seeing her on the news. And then they interview him now. And his interview now, I mean, they go into this extensive thing about Tony. What's his name? Tony Jackson. They go into this extensive thing. This guy does this interview now. And he is like, the family deserves answers. I want answers for the family. I am in here for life. I am never getting out. If I had answers for the family, I would give them to them. He's like, I had nothing to do with her. I did not know her. He was like, I hope that they get the answers they want. I was like, this man is being so genuine on camera. So they go this whole thing, and the detective at the end is even like, he goes, I don't think Tony Jackson had anything to do with it. So they interview him and whatever. So now we've got, Brad is still out there, okay? John Van Cise, there's no evidence. Tony Jackson, there's no evidence. But we've now spent 30 minutes of a documentary about Tony Jackson, of which, why take us down that road even, and further, like, talk about these people's reputations, when you know there's no truth. It's really poor reporting in a true crime documentary. It's all sensationalization about this story. But it's no, like, new leads about anything. Then they go back to Brad, and then they go to Brad's hometown to interview him. The detective's like, I don't know how this is going to go. Sometimes when we knock on people's door, it goes horribly. But he's very cooperative. He goes to the police station, like I said, to be interviewed. The detective thinks he's being shady. He's like, he didn't ask him any questions. Oh, he says Brad didn't ask him any questions about the case. He's like, people always ask us questions about, maybe those people are guilty. Maybe Brad's not guilty. And it's also been 30 years, you know? I mean, maybe Brad's like, I'm trying to help you as much as I possibly can, but I'm not, I'm out of this at this point. He's like, yeah, I didn't answer any questions. They asked him to give DNA. He gives DNA. So what their evidence is that his divorce was filed in 6/23. Somebody that looked like him was seen outside of Jodi's apartment at 6/25, and then she went missing on 6/27. And he's like, things don't add up with this story, but they don't say what things don't add up with this story. Then they go to this area because somebody gives them this clue that the area behind Brad's old house in the town that he's living in now, which was called, I don't know, I have it written down here somewhere. But anyway, that's possibly where he buried his body. They did this extensive search. I've seen enough true crime documentaries when they do these searches that if they were going to find something, it would have been news a year ago and you would have heard about it. So I already knew, like, going into this, they're not going to find anything. Then they go in this whole thing about bones and cow bones don't look like human bones. I'm like, what are you doing this filler for? This could have been a 45-minute documentary about Jodi Huisentruit to get this. Oh, we did that for the 2020 special. So this is a sensationalization of the story. It's really a re-victimization of the story of Jodi Huisentruit. For what? I'm confused at this point. Because the documentary, each of the suspects, it's like they act like they have something to do with it, but they just knock them down one by one with all their lack of evidence. So then the episode 3 is that they do this search, hopefully to find Jodi's remains in Winstead. That's where he lives. They go to the bones, cow bones, no human remains, cadaver dogs don't find anything. Then they bring up this serial killer named Chris Revac. And his girlfriend lived in Mason City at the time. Not only that, but his girlfriend lived right next door to John Vanise, okay? And this is where I put on here, this show just seems like a lot of speculation and sensationalization. Anyway, it's now we're on a serial killer. And the detective is like, you know, a lot of times we'll bring serial killers in these cases and they'll talk about it. But it's really hard to prove and all this kind of stuff. Now, Chris took his life, okay? So we cannot ever interview this man or find anything out about this man. But before he took his life, he was charged with killing this woman, Renee Williams, okay? But her body was never found. And his girlfriend, she did not live in the second part of the duplex at the time that Jodi Huisentruit went missing. Jodi went missing June 27th. This woman had moved out in March of 95. But what they're speculating is that maybe he went back to look for her. Now, let's just play devil's advocate, okay? I don't know that in my 20 relationships I've had in my life that I ever went to an apartment where somebody had moved out 4 months previous looking to see if they might be hanging around that old apartment. Unless he didn't know that she had moved. Then seeing Jodi come out of John Vansice's apartment would add up with that. Then it would make sense. And I'm almost kind of wondering if that's not what happened and then he followed her. Because one of the things is that the abduction implies that it was violent in nature. The person came from her behind and hit her, okay? And the key was bent so horribly in the door. Well, Brad knew her, okay? And they play up to this alcoholic anger issue thing. Well, if that were the case in the moment, then that could be true. But he didn't have any kind of hatred towards her. So, unless it was an act of violence. Tony Jackson is ruled out. John Vansice loved her. You can tell that. So, unless she, he stayed there for the night, and then she kicked him out and said, we're done. Or, there's a billion and one scenarios, but they don't ever speculate about that, right? So the serial killer thing is one that it could be stranger comes into town, abducts Jodi Huisentruit, and we never know who the stranger is. It could be the serial killer thing. The serial killer is the one aspect that is a little bit interesting to me. Hold on just a second. Okay, except, the battery's at the end, except that the MO is completely different. Because he's actually found to have also killed 2 other women 11 years later, this Deirdre Harm, and also another woman, I've got them all on here listed somewhere, Deirdre Harm, and what was the other woman's name? Deirdre Harm and Renee Williams. But both of them were taken in the middle of the night from a bar. So you're talking about a change in MO, and Jodi Huisentruit would have been Chris's first victim, okay? Which, that could be possible, that it changed over time, and there could have been 30 women in between. So that's the one, to me, that makes the most the most sense, is the one. But nobody knows where he was at that time. There's no work records. They don't even go to find like the ex-girlfriend. I mean, they go and do this cadaver dog thing, but they don't even go to look to people that knew like Chris at the time to go interview anybody. This is where I was like, is the investigation for production, or is the investigation like you're really doing an investigation? Y'all know what I'm talking about when you watch a true crime, and you can tell they're really doing like a true, like part of the true crime documentary was them going in to look at like Brad. Like one of the reasons why Brad was such a heavy suspect in this documentary was because the producer, this Maria, she was like, we're going to go with him as he interviews the suspect, like in real time, and show what it's like. So I'm like, is that what the concept for this documentary was? Like them doing an active investigation? Well, that's not a new concept. I've seen that in other true crime documentaries and nothing came from it, right? So now we're back at Brad again, okay? Because Brad's the only one that hasn't died or they can even investigate at all. And that now, after DNA interviews, they're asking him to take a polygraph test. So he agrees to take a polygraph test. I mean, if you're trying to hide, I don't think you give DNA, polygraph tests, whatever. And they never come out and say, oh, is DNA tested for this, whatever. Nothing. The only thing the detective said was that it was being shady. So they said that they had several people take polygraph tests, but he does it to clear his name. They talk about in here that John Seiss, like after he passed his polygraph test, he like popped champagne and was like bragging to the detectives about it, that he like passed his test or something like that. I don't know. The Brad thing to me, or not the Brad, John Van Seiss, the older guy, I don't know. The whole thing is weird to me, but I don't know that I think that he was a killer anyway. But I could be wrong about that. Brad was cooperative, but they won't release the results, so you don't know anything. And then I put on here, of all the suspects, they don't have enough to charge anyone, is what they say at the end. But they kind of do publicly convict this John Van Seiss guy by saying that, and he's dead, he can't defend himself or even be interviewed, and he's been interviewed all these times. They don't show any of the interviews. They don't show any of the information that comes out. They just show this one thing over and over and over again of John Van Seiss talking about how much he misses Jodi. But he cooperated greatly before. They don't show the interviews. They don't show the detective interviews. Maybe they can't because it's an open case. But they show the interview room with Brad, but they don't show any of it with John Van Seiss. They don't show anything with any of these other people. And so as of 2025, they haven't charged anybody. But they kind of publicly convict this Brad guy and also this John guy with literally no evidence whatsoever. I mean, I have to believe that there are a lot of people out there that are like, oh, John Van Seiss did it. Or, oh, Brad did it. But there's no evidence. There's, you know, this kind of little pieces here and there that kind of add up, but there's literally no factual evidence that proves that either one of them was there, had anything to do with it, had any contact with her that morning or anything. I don't know. I mean, I put on here, and so at the end they said they just want to find her and they're building a case, but the detective said they're building a case on taking someone to court. Who? After 3 episodes, would you at least... And they're like, but we can't say who it is because we don't want to ruin the case. They're not building a case on anybody. If they were building a case on this Brad guy, they would have said something about all the DNA results, all this kind of stuff. Not to mention that this documentary was filmed a year ago, and there's no new updates on it. And the detective's like, we have to keep quiet or it could hurt the case. And I'm like, they have no idea. They have no idea what's going on. And they also say that they have no DNA because the DNA from that site was like all ruined and all this kind of stuff. They have no DNA from the site whatsoever. I thought they did a great job of humanizing Jodi and telling the story of Jodi Huisentruit. And I kind of, to be honest with you, I don't know why we have to sensationalize the suspects and the murder investigation to just tell the story. Why wouldn't it have been just an interesting enough story to tell about the life and death of Jodi Huisentruit and how sad that was? But I feel like that was kind of missed. And say, it's been 30 years since she was abducted. And let's talk about maybe other missing and abducted women that have gone missing in this country for over 30 years. Jodi's not the only one. Let's talk about cases that didn't get the attention, you know? Women from marginalized communities that have been missing for 30 to 50 years that have never gotten any kind of attention like Jodi has because she was a newscaster. Not that that makes her story any worse or any better. I'm just saying, this documentary could have been so much more. It didn't have to be, let's go down this suspect lane and there's nothing. Let's publicly convict this person and there's nothing. It could have been a story about who, if I were going to do it, I would have done a story about Jodi Huisentruit and the 30th anniversary of her abduction and other missing women that because she was a newscaster, what stories would she have brought the attention to of missing women in our country? That, I think, is a story that I would have been more interested in watching than this. The story of Jodi Huisentruit was very interesting to me. What the investigation showed was that the investigation, it was never and still is not being done well. Anyway, let me know if you watch in the comment section below. It's just my opinion. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.